Hey everybody, it's Senior Managing Editor Bob Crossan from Water and Waste Digest. I am here today with Jason Iskovic. He is the Director of Legislative Affairs for NACWA. Yeah, so we wanted to talk to you a little bit about some of the stuff that's happening on the Hill. I know specifically the Senate has been working to get some provisions done for renewables, especially with America's Water Infrastructure Act. Could you talk a little bit about what's going on with that bill, where it's headed, and what's in it? What can people expect from a utility perspective?
Sure. Yeah. So last week, or I guess it was 2 weeks ago now, the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee passed what they call their Water Resources Development Act. They actually broke it down to two bills. One was a drinking water piece. The second was the clean water, and then the Army Corps provisions. So for our purposes, we focus more on the AWIA piece, which was the clean water piece for NACWA's purposes and our members. So yeah, it's a really good bill in my perspective and NACWA's perspective. There's a lot of good stuff in there. I think probably the biggest thing that we've been advocating for is increased funding for the clean water SRF, the state revolving funds. The bill authorizes, I think, $7.5 billion over 3 years, which can act to be the largest increase ever for the SRFs, which really is, quite frankly, I always like to say the bread and butter federal financial tool for public water utilities. There's also some other good programs in there on the funding side. There was increased funding and renewal, or reauthorization rather, of the stormwater overflow and the sewer overflow and stormwater control grants program at $250 million, which is really key for our members. There was a new resiliency program to help our utilities mitigate against some of the natural hazards and what weather events they're experiencing. There's also some workforce development grants to help provide assistance to utilities in the sector and deal with some of the workforce issues that we're seeing coming down the pipeline. So a lot of good provisions in there, and we look forward to seeing it advance to the Senate and then working with the House with the conference process, in Congress this summer.
Yeah, well, and historically, these bills have had like near unanimous support, it seems like, in Congress. So this is, I would imagine, this is more likely to pass than some of the other stuff that we've seen getting thrown around at the moment.
Yeah, it's a very bipartisan bill. I think one of the great things is there's a lot of partisanship in Congress right now and has been for a long time. I think we're seeing again. This is what this would be the third WRDA bill now passed in the last three Congresses. So each Congress has seen a very bipartisan WRDA bills. Hopefully, we can continue that trend, but don't see it going any differently.
Yeah, yeah. So, in terms of what utilities can leverage and whatnot, you mentioned the state revolving funds. That
Yep.
seems to be growing more and more in importance as a tool for utilities to use year over year. And especially this year being election year, it was pretty well understood from my perspective that that's kind of going to be your primary tool. Could you talk a little bit about the state revolving fund, why it's become so important, and how that can be leveraged with should AWIA get reenacted through
Sure.
Congress?
Yeah, I was saying earlier, I think it's really kind of what I was like called the bread and butter federal financial tool for our water utilities. Obviously, there's other programs and stuff. I mentioned the stormwater and CSO grant programs and things like that, the WIFIA program as well. But I think the key really is, right now, less than 5% of overall federal investment, or I'm sorry, overall investment for the water sector comes from the federal government. So that really leaves the vast majority of the burden on local ratepayers and communities to really ensure that there's proper funding for infrastructure, maintenance, and upgrades, things like that. So the federal investment, especially compared to other infrastructure sectors, is very low. I think the SRFs, it's a start. Obviously, a lot more funding is needed, but that's really kind of the key tool that we can use to at least start, helping communities get the federal financing they need.
So when it comes to this AWIA bill and whatnot, is that primarily just SRF funds, or are there other programs included in that?
Yeah, so the SRFs, the one, there's about $7.5 billion over 3 years for the clean water SRF. So it reauthorizes and increases the funding. Obviously, it'd have to be subsequently appropriated for,
Mhm.
when the bill passes into law, for those fiscal years subsequently. But there is also, like I said, there's about $250 million each year for 2 years for the super overflow and stormwater control grants program. There's, I think, $55 million in core funding for the WIFIA program. And I believe there's a new program, like I was saying, for the resiliency program that provides grants to utilities to help with wet weather and natural disaster type events. So there's a plethora of programs, either new or reauthorized, water programs that are available through the AWIA bill.
Gotcha. Well, one of the other things that it seemed to be noted in some of your press materials and whatnot is that the importance of just financing for critical infrastructure in general, specifically for water. I think to date, right now, with all the stimulus bills that have been passed, none of them have had major funding for water infrastructure. Could you
Right.
explain kind of the financial hardships that utilities are facing right now and how a bill supporting them could be effective and what types of things you'd be looking for in that?
Yeah, I think there's the impacts on public utilities, water utilities right now are it's really it's a lot of it they're already incurring, and a lot of the cases are estimated impacts. But we put out a financial impact statement a couple weeks ago. We did with our drinking water folks. There's roughly a $30 billion potentially estimated financial impacts on public utilities generally on the water sector. About $16.8 billion on the clean water side. That reflects both the overall revenue losses from industrial, business, commercial side, which is the vast bulk of it. But then there's also about a $4 billion roughly expected estimated loss from low-income ratepayers or delinquencies for people that cannot pay their utility bills. So it's a pretty large economic impact on utilities. I think the key thing is we are essential. We're an essential part of the sector, and quite frankly, without water, it's really there's no way we're really going to continue to combat and mitigate some of the impacts from the coronavirus pandemic. So
Yeah.
I think and ultimately, those costs will get passed on to ratepayers later on. If the federal government can provide.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, like you said, that this essential service, I mean, how are you going to wash your hands? How can hospitals even operate without clean water? Like it's such a backbone and in a lot of ways it's just kind of taken for granted, like it always has been. I think that we've been able to elevate it a little bit more during this pandemic, but I don't think it's still to the degree that it should be elevated.
Right. Yeah. It's only going to continue to grow. I think as we've seen, the pandemic is not getting any better, and water is going to continue to be essential, and along with obviously a vaccine, but really mitigating and ending this this pandemic.
Yeah, yeah. So what are some getting back to kind of the bills and stuff like that, what are some of the
Sure.
avenues that utilities have to influence those bills? How can they get involved? What's their best course of action when it comes to that?
Right. I think we're as strong as our members, and quite frankly, our members have been great. One of the key things our members have been doing, and I know a lot of the other associations and sector members have been as well, is really reaching out to their member of Congress, representative, their senator, really urging to them, the impacts this is going to have on their ratepayers, but ultimately that member of Congress's constituency here on out. So I think member engagement's been key. As an association, as a sector, we're continuing to push, whether that's funding for the low income piece as well as the overall industrial revenue, industrial commercial losses we were talking about. But I think it's really just continue to work with our members, coalitions, just continue advocacy in making Congress really understand the impacts that are being felt by the public water utility sector.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you so much for taking time with me. Is there anything else you wanted to share with everyone? I imagine that you guys have a lot of press materials on your website, for example, that even utilities would have access to in terms of learning kind of more about what you're doing in Washington and why that's important.
Yeah, we do. I definitely encourage you to visit our website. A lot of that is made for the public to view some of the different articles or weekly articles we've written. But we also encourage anybody in the water sector elsewhere, if they do have questions, to reach out to myself or any member of staff. We're always willing to talk and appreciate any help and advocacy that you guys can do for the water sector as well. And really making people realize the importance that our sector plays during this pandemic and generally.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you taking the time to chat with us and learning more, a little bit more about what's going on in Washington. I'm pretty hopeful for that Senate bill. We'll see how the next stimulus bill goes, but that one still seems up in the air.
Yeah, we'll see how it all comes together. I think whether it's stimulus related or what, I think there's some good things on the horizon for the water sector. I really do, and we appreciate everything Congress is doing. Both Democrat, Republican.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks, Jason.
Great, thanks, Bob. Appreciate your time having me.